Around the Way Girl and the picture book Early Sunday Morning. She is the editorial director of Denene Milner Books, an award-winning imprint that has published 2 Caldecott Honor books, a Newbery Honor book, the Kirkus Prize for Children's Literature, and a Southern Book Award. Many of those beautiful children's books are available out front. And again, so much of Denene's career has been about honoring and celebrating the works of others. But tonight is about Denene. This story that you're about to hold in your hands, here, One Blood, this is a really special book. And so please put your hands together and welcome Denene Milner with the enthusiasm this book deserves. It is the work of a lifetime, the work of a heart. Please, please, please give it up for Denene Milner and Taylor Jones.
Hi, everyone. I am so honored to be here and see my friend traveled all the way from Berlin.
Well, here we are to celebrate Denene and her beautiful novel, One Blood. I don't know how many of you have had the pleasure of reading it already, but this is not a book you will soon forget. This is the book that is in that unputdownable category. And I just want to get started by saying, Denene, how did you come to write this book?
Oh, goodness.
Did it, y'all?
I've always felt like I had this book in my heart. It is very much about the story of my mother, who I grew up in the North, but grew up in a very Southern household. My mother's from South Carolina, my dad's from Virginia, and we were surrounded by Southerners. And my mother believed in children being seen and not heard. And so there were just a lot of things that I always wanted to talk to her about and never got the chance to. By the time I became a mother in my own right, my mother softened, she changed, right? As a grandmother, she became more malleable. And that's when she started opening up and, encouraging me to have some strength about myself as a woman. We started communicating that woman to woman, but she passed away 3 years after my first baby was born. And all of the things that I wanted to ask her, I never got to ask her, are in this book.
You said that you grew up in a very Southern household. Because I would say when I was reading this book, I was like, I believe Denene is some kind of New Yorker, but this story has just such beautiful Southern rhythms. It felt like a love letter to the generation of Southern women that, came before us.
Right, because my mom, again, is from South Carolina. Her best friends were from Alabama, Mississippi, West Virginia, Virginia. And they brought those Southern ways to New York. They didn't drop away just because of their geographical, place. And so that's the way that I was raised. That's the way that the women in my life talked. Part of this was written at my dad's house in Virginia, where Mama and Grace are is my dad's yard. And my great grandmother was a midwife and a healer. That's Mama all day. And so I'm pulling from the stories and the cadences and the rhythms of my family and the people that I was raised with.
Well, I must say, I was left breathless, and I am so eager to hear you read this story in your voice. So if it pleases you, we would love to hear you read from the first part of the book. Well, maybe we'll tell a little bit about how the book is structured.
Yes, so the book is structured it's divided up into 3 different books. The book of Grace, who is the mother or the teenage unwed mother who has her baby taken away. the book of Dolores, who is the mother who adopts that baby, and the book of Ray, who is that baby as a mother in her own right. And so the tale is centered around adoption and family secrets and how people, specifically these women, search for freedom. So I'll read from the very beginning of the book of Grace. The blood never much bothered Grace. Mama Rubel got her used to it early on when she was little old, way before she let her only granddaughter, her apprentice, tend the stove at her first baby hatching, before even Grace's first blood trickled down her thigh. There it was, her monthly, making a dark red liquid trail past her calf and ankle, dripping into the thick, fertile Virginia dirt she planted her feet in as she reached for the pins on the laundry line. Grace cocked her head and stared at it in wonder for just a moment, then went on in the outhouse and made her sanitary pad, just like Mama Rubel had taught her to do, with the pins and rib pieces to feed Sally. Just as natural and nasty as slopping hogs, Grace thought. Now her best friend Cheryl, she didn't see it that way. She cried holy hell when her blood came in. Nobody, not her mama, not her big sissy, not Nan auntie, bothered to tell her what was inevitable. They held it to their chests like a big secret Cheryl had no right to know. She had killed her fool self when she saw the red puddle on her little piece of school bench and realized it was oozing from her pom-pom. Knocked over the desk, tripped down the rickety schoolhouse steps, and just took off running down toward Howard Pasture, hollering and screaming like a stuffed pig. The laughter of the boys and the screams of Miss Garvey, their school teacher, chasing behind her. But Grace, she understood the power of the blood. Mama Rubel saw to it, made her look straight at it for sport and for practicality's sake. Mama knew, after all, that her grandbaby would have the calling. Saw it in a vision just as plain as day one afternoon as she pulled cooked salad roots from the ground deep in the woods down by the river, where she had gone to forage and be still and make offerings to the spirits of her mother and her mother before that. In the vision, there had been Grace's hands, small, delicate, strong, gently twisting, pulling a baby's head as it emerged between its mother's legs. The movements, the way Grace's fingers fluttered about the infant's curls had made Mama's heart beat fast. She could feel her granddaughter's happy in the tingles of her fingertips in each of her own palms. Mama had slowly fallen to her knees, sticks and pebbles digging into the thick of her skirt. She'd kiss those palms and press them warm and pulsing with energy to her cheeks. Love was there. Grace would continue in the tradition of the Adams women. Mama's dead did not lie. Show her the blood, they whispered in the breeze, and the beams of light rushing through the leaves. Show her what she already knows.
The entire book is as beautiful and poetic as that excerpt. I feel like this is a novel about what we pass down deliberately, like this gift of birthing babies, but also the things that we pass down without knowing them, the things we think that if we don't speak them will never be discovered. Right? It's a story of heritage and inheritance.
Absolutely. And then that's the point of One Blood, right? It's how much does nature play in who you ultimately become, and how much does nurture ultimately play in who you become. I know that there are many things that I picked up from my mother in my own mothering, but there are things that I don't know where I got that from. Like, where did this come from? And as a child of adoption, I'm constantly wondering what's in my blood, what's in my DNA, and what's in my cellular memory, right? Like, what comes from my birth mother and what comes directly from my mom. I can figure out what came from my mom because she raised me. But there are just some things that I'm wondering, well, did I pick that up from like a blog, or did I get that from a book? Or the way that I'm talking to my child, was that from my birth mother? The way that I'm approaching these kids. And you know, that's real, and that's explored in One Blood.
I think it's so important, this conversation about adoption. I mean, we are in a different era now where people are speaking more openly, but I know when I was growing up, I was a child of the '70s. No one spoke about adoption. The thought was that if you had adopted children, you should never tell them. And so, but now people do talk to their children, but what was your experience?
I mean, so like, Ray in the book, part of Ray's story is directly from my own. I found out that I was adopted when I was 12, sleeping through my parents' papers, being nosy. That's how I am. I'm a journalist for a reason. And I was afraid to tell them because A, I thought I was gonna get in trouble for sleeping through their things. And B, because if it was their secret and they decided that it was a secret, then it was also obviously my secret too. I didn't tell, my mom passed away without knowing that I knew that I was adopted. I was 34 when she died. That night, I came clean to my dad and told him, I know that I'm adopted. And then he told me just a little bit of what he knew about my adoption. But while researching for One Blood, you know, a big part of where that secrecy comes from, it wasn't just a matter of, in Lolo's case, she's infertile. That's something that she doesn't want to talk about. She doesn't want everybody in that business. She doesn't want anybody to know how she became infertile because there's a whole lot of trauma and pain behind that, right? But it wasn't just about your personal kind of, I want to keep this close to my chest. The government colluded, the social services community colluded to keep children and their adoptive parents quiet. For instance, I just told my dad, during the course of writing this book, I found my birth mother. And after a year and a half of holding it to myself, I finally got the cojones to go and tell him that I found my birth mother. And I thought that he was going to be angry. I thought that he was going to be disappointed. I thought that he was going to think that my love for him was somehow diminished because I was looking even for who these people were. But he was happy for me. And then he said something that just blew my mind that can completely track with my research for One Blood. He said, the judge told us not to tell you. The judge said that we could get in trouble for telling you. And so that was a part of the conspiracy between the government trying to, and it's all just interrelated. You know anything about the baby scoop era? It's when the government decided and colluded with social services or social workers to take the babies from unwed mothers, convince unwed mothers that they were loose, whores, trash, that their babies would be bastards, and that they were better off in the hands of a married couple, so that everybody would, you go away and you forget that you had that baby. You give that baby over there to these people who deserve to have a baby, but maybe can't have one, because what you did was a sin against God. So you go off and you forget that this ever happened. Well, I know what it was like to hold babies in my belly. I know what it means if this one doesn't, this is my baby right here. Sorry. I know that if I can't see her or Lila, how I feel, if I know that something is wrong or I think something is wrong, I know what that feels like to have my whole wound just caving in because I want to make sure that my children are okay. Can you imagine having a baby and someone saying, forget you had it? Just send it off somewhere and you go on about your life. That's crazy to me. But that happened during the baby scoop era. Over 2 million children were taken from their parents, from their mothers. I was born in one of those homes that was run by the Salvation Army, that was specifically created to 85% of the women who had babies there had their babies taken away or were coerced into giving their children away. And I was one of those kids. And I found that out while I was researching One Blood.
How did you find it out?
Well, when you're adopted, you have a an abbreviated birth certificate because, of course, it's a secret. Nobody wants you to know who your birth mother is. You don't even know really if your birthday is your actual birthday. I didn't know if my birthday was actually my birthday because I was told, and my father was told, my parents were told that I was left on a stoop and at an orphanage, and they came along 4 days later and found me and took me home. Right? That was the story. And that's all he knew. And so my birth certificate said that I was born in Booth Memorial Hospital in Flushing, Queens. Now, over the years, I, looked, just did a casual search, like, well, it's not called Booth Memorial Hospital anymore, it's called Queens Memorial Hospital. And so I just thought it was a regular hospital. Then one night, while I was researching for One Blood, I Googled, what was it like to be an unwed teenage mom in 1968? And I kept coming across these pages upon pages of people on these sites for booth babies. People looking for their mothers, or mothers looking for their children who were born in Booth Memorial hospitals all across the country. I didn't know that they were all across the country. I thought that I was born in a place that was renamed Queens Memorial Hospital in Flushing, New York. And so I did a little bit more research and then came across what Booth Memorial Hospital actually was. And it was a series of homes for unwed mothers. And then realized that I was probably taken away from my mother. And I cried all over the page. All over the page. I bet you could figure out what page it is that came after I found it out.
I'm glad that you found her. Yeah. And I know she must be so proud.
It was crazy. So I found her through her death certificate. People put, like memorials, when people pass away, they put memorials now online. This woman lived in Snellville, Georgia, which is where I moved when I first moved down here from New York. So my birth mother could have been on the line at Chick-fil-A. She could have been sitting next to me on the church pew. She could have been at the program right next to me, and I didn't know it. She passed away in 2017.
Yeah. Has writing this book helped you find healing then?
Not really. Because up until that moment, I didn't feel like I was broken or traumatized or hurt, right? Like I loved my parents loved me, my parents raised me, they disciplined me, they made sure I get to college, they made sure I did all the right things to get to this moment right here. And I love them dearly. I never thought about anyone else being my parents, being my mother, right? Until now, in writing this book.
Well, this book is so much also about the miracle of motherhood, the responsibilities of motherhood, the beauty of motherhood, and also the sorrow of it. And I know that Black motherhood is one of the topics that interest you. I mean, I'm sure many of you have followed for, how long did you do My Brown Baby?
Like from 2008 until like 2018, about 10 years.
Helping Black women reclaim their motherhood.
Yes, absolutely.
And be seen as mothers, and their motherhood be valued, and the motherhood of Black women so often is reduced to kind of a pathology. And I feel like your work has served to lift up Black women and Black mothers. And I think that is the love that you feel for Black women and their children, and your keen awareness to the challenges and trauma, all of that is in this book on every page. Now, you said that your story, your personal story is more kind of in the section of Book of Break.
Yes.
I won't say that I have a favorite, each section of each of the books. Did you mean that it felt like each of the books, the book of Grace, the book of Dolores, the book of Ray, I feel like you could read them separately or together.
I wanted each one of those women to have their own story, right? And I wanted them to stand on their own. They're abbreviated, right? Each one is about 120 pages or so. Grace's story ends in a way that I've heard people complaining about, what I think.
Just not complaining. You tell them, come call me, what are they saying?
That you don't know what happens.
You mean like, you don't know what happens to her? You know what happens to her.
I mean, you know what happens to her, but people want to know what happens to her after what happens to her.
Well, I'm gonna say that, in my view, that is an incredible compliment to you that you left them wanting more. And I don't think that that's a flaw in look.
But it was purposeful, right? Like Grace is the mother, the birth mother. And often we don't know what happens to the birth mother. We don't even know that the birth mothers exist sometimes, right? And so Grace's story ends the way that it does so that you can feel what I feel as an adopted child. What happened to my mother? Where did she go? What was her life like? Why did I end up being given away? Or who was responsible for taking me away from her? And what did that mean for both of us? Because that's not something that I've thought about until now. And so I wanted the reader to be able to feel that, just a little bit of it.
I think the reader does. I mean, I was haunted by Grace. I was haunted by her story. It was so moving and so. It just shows how much our lives are impacted by things beyond our control. I mean, the way that racism affects her life, the way that racism takes her from her loving grandmother, the way that patriarchy causes her to lose her mother, like all of this. And it culminates in this amazing baby, this amazing daughter, Ray. Would you read to us from Ray's part?
I can't.
I know, don't you think she should read more often? I'm trying to tell her, she's like 2 pages is a lot. I'm like, you just get us warmed up. We want it all.
This is Ray with Lolo, her mom. And her mom's handsome on that. You smell it? Ray asked. It's been a while since he came, but he's here again for you and the baby. Maybe for me. You use Daddy's aftershave? Lolo asked, completely misunderstanding what precisely was happening. No, Mommy, Ray said gently. That's Daddy's scent. Ray looked into her mother's eyes, her pupils piercing, her pupils saying exactly what Lolo needed to understand. He comes to you like this. Sometimes it's his scent I smell, the aftershave, Ray said. Sometimes he comes to me in dreams. Once I woke up on a Sunday morning and smelled cow liver, plain as day. I jumped out of the bed and raced into the kitchen, and it was quiet and empty, everything in place. But it smelled like he was standing right there over the stove, cooking liver with that gravy I like, and rice, his favorite. I didn't tell you, Ray added, because I thought you would think it was something evil. You know I don't believe in that voodoo stuff. It's not in the Bible, and God's word tells us not to worship false idols. Mommy, I don't have any control over this. I see things in my dreams all the time. Perhaps since I was little. I just never told you. I thought maybe I was evil or sinning against God because that's what you raised us to believe. But you smell him too. How can Daddy's presence be evil? Let me finish, Ray, Lolo said, raising her hand to shut her daughter. I have something I need to show you. I'll be right back, she said. Lolo disappeared back down the hall and reappeared just as quickly with a small white couch in her palm. She ran her thumbs over it slowly and stood there, her feet stuck to the linoleum Tommy had laid with his own hands when Ray was just a kid, dancing around on the other side of the kitchen threshold, regaling her father with a recap of her favorite book, The Little Princess. This is yours, Lolo said simply. She pressed it into Ray's hands. Ray looked quizzically at the pouch, then pulled it open. Her fingers touched the lock of hair first. She pulled out the bundle and her body tingled like some electrical current gently shocking her system awake. She laid it on the table, and then the rabbit's foot next to it, and then the pipe. She gasped when she pulled out the handkerchief and saw the blood-stained material between her fingertips. That she dropped on the table, this time involuntarily. her hand shaking as she cocked her head to one side and then the other, washing over it with her watery eyes. There's one more thing in there, Lois. Ray hesitantly reached back into the pouch and pulled out the folded brown paper bag square. She slowly unfolded the paper and read its contents. What is this? She asked, finally looking up. Lolo searched for the words, that fear of what Tommy would think of this thing, of what God would think of this thing, had kept her from uttering over the past 33 years. Standing there, her daughter's heart open wide, Lolo found the courage to pour in. Your daddy didn't want me to show this to you, but Lolo paused. Mommy, what is this? Ray asked again, her heart racing as she rubbed the paper between her fingers and stared at the letters. This baby, this baby, this baby, a sweet, protected, prosperous life. That was in the bag they found you in at the orphanage, Lolo's words. You know what, I cannot see. There it is. That was the bag they found you in at the orphanage. Lola's words, which she'd swallowed whole almost 3.5 decades earlier, gushed from her throat. I think your birth mother left it for you. See what this is, she said, pointing to the circle of words on the paper. It's a wish, like a prayer, but the way they used to write them down in the old days, back in the South, when they believed in paints and roots and such. It's a petition. A what? A petition, prayer for you, Ray. I think from your mother asking for your protection, Lolo said. I think she wanted this to be with you. I think that's what she hoped for you, protection. Your daddy, he was your protector. He was my protector, Lolo said. She rubbed Ray's shoulders as she talked. That's all I required of him, and he did that. He protected us. He found you in that basement, and he is the one who made sure you were okay, even when it was me who was hurting you. He didn't want me to give you this because as far as he was concerned, we are your family, and you were born the day we brought you home. We are your parents. Nothing else before that mattered to him. But this paper, this petition, he did what it asked of him. This presence here right now tells me he still is. Ray, overwhelmed by the idea that her birth mother wished best for her, that she was holding her hair and blood in her hands, that her dead father was taking up space in the room in which she and her mother stood, just down the hall from where her baby was laying her head, took off running, out the kitchen, down the hall, to the bathroom, the scent following her as she moved. Ray slammed the door and slid down onto the bath mat, still wet with the water she just bathed her daughter in about an hour earlier. Now her mother's blood between her fingertips, her own baby just down the hallway. Ray regarded this woman as so much more than an inanimate object or some made-up fairy tale gathering dust on the shelf. Ray understood her humanity. Her decision, as far as Ray was concerned, was beautiful, selfless, steeped in pain, heartbreak, and yes, love. A love that she could now understand because she too was a mother who had carried her own baby in her womb and couldn't fathom the strength and courage and resolve it must have taken for her birth mother to leave her child, her blood, the very beat of her heart, on a stoop for someone else, Lola Tommy, who loved her deeply, to have. To Ray, it was the ultimate sacrifice, a miracle, no different from the miracle of conception. But it took the sperm to meet egg and egg to attach to womb and for womb to maintain the absolute perfect conditions for new life and for new life to find its way to loving arms. The pouch was proof to Ray that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ray held the paper to her heart and inhaled her father's scent. Daddy, I miss you. I love you. I love you. I love you. And I miss you. And I love you, she said. And then for her mother, the one whose blood ran through her veins, she wailed.
I must say, hearing it in your own voice just brings it to life. Did you do the audiobook yourself?
I didn't. I'm sorry. No. I'm very blessed that Tina Lippert did Grayson's voice. Tina Lippert was in Queen Sugar, on Vine in Queen Sugar, and I was just listening to it in the car on the way here. It is so beautiful. My God, her voice. And then Bonnie Tyler. She's the queen of it. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. She's the queen of Lolo. She did Dolores's, the Book of Dolores, and then Janice Abbott did the Book of Ray. And then I read Mari's poem. Mari wrote a poem that's in the very beginning of the book. She let me use it for the opening, and then I read the acknowledgements.
Would you share that poem with us?
Sure. So this poem, it wasn't, like I said, I didn't think about my adoption a whole lot until very recently. And it was very rare that anyone could make me feel a way about it. But one time we were coming from a soccer game, and we were listening to a popular radio show host on the radio, and he was doing a Q&A or reading a letter. And it was from a man who was trying to decide if he was going to adopt the child of a woman that he was dating or married to, or if there was some kind of foolishness going on between the birth dad and the new guy. And the person who was answering the question on this radio show referred to the kid as a throwaway kid. I know that you know, like adopted kids are throwaway kids. And it made me feel a way, and I was undone for quite some time. And just got really quiet and really upset. The next day was curriculum night at my daughter's school. She went to Paideia here in Atlanta. And she won a poetry contest with this poem. And the poem is about nature and nurture and the power of blood and how it connects us as humans. And when she read it, I just burst into tears because she had, in her words, at age 13, brought me back around to what it means to be a human being, and that it doesn't matter whose blood runs through my veins because we're all interconnected, right? Like, I may not know who my birth parents are, but we are still connected. I'm still connected to humanity. And so that makes me belong and not a throwaway baby. So I wanted this piece to be in this book because it is very much connected to what the book is about. It's called The Blood. The blood. The blood that runs through my veins, my brain, my heart. The blood, the biggest puzzle piece making me and only me. I cannot fathom how much blood. The same blood that was running through my veins when I took my first breath, when I made my first appearance, my first impression on my people, on this world. I cannot fathom how much blood. The same blood that is just one ripple, one little wave, one teaspoon in the sea of blood. The gallons and gallons of heritage. The big body of being, with everyone's little ripples and little waves and little teaspoons coursing through it, until millions of different families become one. I cannot fathom how little blood, but my little teaspoon carries a world. My blood flows back to Somalia and Ethiopia hundreds and hundreds of years ago. My blood flows back to my enslaved ancestors. My blood flows through everything, everyone. People interconnect and reconnect. Blood flows and mixes together, and we know that we are the same. That is how the beautiful blood works. The blood of generations that found its way to your veins. It is golden, all of that blood. It trickles down to you, that little teaspoon in the big body of being.
Well, I think this is a wonderful place to take your questions. A microphone right over here.
If you can't come to it, I'll bring it to you.
I'm also capable of running down the road.
I can come to it.
Okay.
Hello, and thank you, so high. I'd like to get the first question so I can get the ball rolling, let people know it's not that hard. In 1968 at Booth Memorial Hospital in Philadelphia off City Line Avenue, I birthed the most beautiful human being I've ever met. The point I wanted to make, I sent her a picture of me here so she'd know that I made it and I was excited about it. But the point I wanted to make and confirms that Booth Memorial Hospital staff told us, 15-year-olds, 32-year-olds, I was 16. You don't have to tell anyone this happened, but your gynecologist. And they were serious. They meant that. And the women I ran into there were university professors who were afraid of losing tenure if someone found out they had a child out of wedlock. 15-year-olds who were raped by their fathers, by their stepfathers. And an assortment of women with issues and concerns about their brown babies, their white babies, their mixed babies. Mine was, if I let this little brown baby go into that system, how do I know somebody will look after her? And the social worker said, I'm terribly disappointed in your choice. Thank you for your book. Thank you for remembering. It's not that hard. Jeez.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for writing a beautiful book. I want to come away from narrative, just for a minute. You talked about ending the book, and it was aligned with the way one would wonder about their mother in the world that they don't have. And I thought that was such a wonderful craft choice. And I'd like for you to kind of talk about some other craft decisions in the text.
Sure. I want to make sure that we change that we will.
It's done.
So writing the 3 separate stories was a craft choice that was kind of rooted an inspiration from the 12 Tribes of Manhattan. The way that she wrote that book, it felt more like short stories with each character interconnected, but each one of those stories could stand on their own. And so that the book of Grace, the book of Dolores, and the book of Ray are directly correlated to that. And I got to thank her to her face or something. I am. It's, but I wanted to make sure that when you read, you could see in Ray's story, there would be things that you could see directly from Grace's story. Even though Ray had no idea who Grace was, I wanted the reader to be able to feel that epigenetic connection between the two of them. And so there was a lot of me going back and forth between those 2 books and making sure that there were things that I pulled out of the book of Grace that showed up in some kind of way, got sold into the book of Ray. The same with the book of Lolo, so that you could see how Ray becomes who she becomes as a mother, a wife, a woman, a friend, a lover, how that directly correlated to her grandmother, her great-grandmother, and her mother. And so there was some sewing going on, right, with the stories. And that was not the easiest thing to do.
No,
It's
that's
like putting a puzzle together.
right. That's such an achievement, to establish that connective tissue. And, you did it well. Thank you. It's not hard.
So I have a two-part question. This is obviously a departure from your body of work. What you typically produce is, you know, stories for other people's stories, and this one was so personal. It's your life, your imagination, your story. How was the process different for you, and how do you feel about writing such a personal piece after putting out, you know, the business of other people's stories? How do you compare and contrast? And then is this the direction your career will take?
Answering the second part first, absolutely. Okay, so Yari's pointing out that you may not be familiar with my other work. So I mostly write for celebrities, or I've written books with my friends, one of whom's in the audience right now, Angela Murray, who is a prolific screenwriter. You see, every week we see a new movie, and she's like, oh yeah. We wrote a book together called The Vow that actually got turned into a movie called With This Rain, starring Jill Scott and Regina Hall. But that was one of the rare novels that I wrote in of the 31 books. I wrote 3 novels with my ex-husband, 4 novels with my friend Mitzi, 3 of which were a series for teenagers, and then a book, well, 2 books with Angela, one that was a nonfiction and one that was fiction about. And then outside of that, mostly what I wrote was books for celebrities. So I wrote Taraji P. Henson's book, Around the Girl. I wrote the first 2 Steve Harvey books. I wrote, Charlie Wilson's book, and Jesse Norman, the opera singer. And then I transitioned into children's books, and I've been working as an editorial director and helping other authors write beautiful books for children, like Seaweed, was written in Dominican watercolor on that you wrote so many years ago and showed it to me, and I was like, this is so fun. And so, yes, I do see myself turning to being able to write my own words and my own thoughts and ideas. Writing for other people is an exercise in the tamping down of ego. Right? Because it's not my book. I am like the surrogate. I'm giving birth, right? And then handing the baby over to you to raise, right? And you know, you don't get to take credit for all that hard work that you do. And it is a very hard job. I'm not just sort of sitting there and taking dictation and then like typing it up and putting it in between 2 book covers. A lot of thought and effort and ideas go into how to formulate those stories, a lot of interviewing, hours and hours and hours and hours of interviewing and going over and organizing all of that. And so I, you know, like as much as many doors as it opened for me financially, work-wise, I think that time has passed, and it's time for me to tell my own stories.
Okay. I just want to say I'm very emotional, even though I haven't read the book yet, but I just bought it on impulse, so. I'm very excited. But I'm curious, because you mentioned the career journey path,
and also just like how emotional this is, and I'm curious. So I'll preface this by saying I think everyone has like a story or a book in them, but I'm also curious how much of this story and your personal story had to wait till, you know, you lived a little more or experienced a little more and see things differently. And I do think part of my question is projecting because I feel like now that I'm 30, I see things way differently. But yeah, I'm just curious how much of this is like now is the time and also you're ready as well.
Right, oh, thank you for that question. I'm always surprised at, like, right now, we seem to be in the middle of this kind of renaissance where young folks are telling their stories and writing memoirs. And, you know, like I see like 22, 23-year-olds, 26-year-olds writing memoirs. And I'm just like, hell, I'm gonna be 55. And I still don't know if I have something to say about my life and whether or not it's worthy for, you know, in between pages. So I admire that, that desire for folks to tell their stories and get it out there and perhaps go back to it when they've grown a little bit more. You know, at age 54, I'll be 55 next month. You know, the beauty of being able to tell this story again, like when we started, I got to answer questions for my characters, answered questions that I had, not just for my mother and not just about my birth mother story, but for myself, right? Like I see in the book of Ray, her growth corresponds with my own growth. And Ray is in her 30s in this book. She's in her late 20s and goes to like 34, 35. And I am a completely different person from who Ray is. I get to look back at my life and the way that I thought about being a mother, being a woman, being a lover, all of those things, and answer those questions for Ray, right? Or help Ray answer those questions. But I'm not, you know, the 34-year-old that I was, you know, I'm not even the 40-year-old, the 45-year-old. Hell, I'm not even the 50-year-old. There's constant growth, and I think that I'd like to explore that in my work. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening to me.
Good evening.
So, many years ago in New York City, at a little newspaper called Overheard, I had the opportunity as a very young producer in the state of New York to interview you and Sean Dove.
Yes.
And I remember being so inspired by you and talking to you on the phone one day. And you said, Andrew, just if I can one more, I'm leaving this paper. I am so proud of you. I mean, it's been over like 30 years. I'm so inspired by you. I am so encouraged. But what I want to know is, see, people watch you, girl. You don't even know they're watching. So I recently relocated. I can't even talk. I'm so excited. I moved from New York City to Philadelphia, and I'm now 9 months in Atlanta, right? And I listened to the sweetest, most beautiful podcast with you and your dad. And what I want to know is, what does Daddy think about this book? That's what I want to know. And everything else will catch up with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I kind of told him what the book is about. Daddy, if you're on Facebook right now, I got a little explaining to do. I haven't talked to him in depth about what the book is about. He's reading it. And I'm sure there will be questions, and I will be ready with answers. But a big hurdle was, again, telling him that I found my birth mother during the course of writing this book. That was way more important to me, and way scarier to me than telling him about this book and what it's about and, you know, the way that I, you know, think about motherhood and thought about motherhood, maybe from my mom's perspective and from my birth mom's perspective, from the women who helped to raise him, right? Like Mama in this book is a composite of his grandmother, who was a midwife and a healer in Virginia. And he would tell me stories about her. And some of those stories actually found their way into the pages. So right now I know that he's in the Book of Grace, and he told my daughter today, right? He said, oh, I'm reading it and I like it so far. Is that what he said?
Well, what that happens to a podcast together, you know, and you guys is that. Still producing, I'm a nurse now, but as you can see. She's thank you for writing.
Thank you. She's talking about a podcast that I had when I was at Georgia Public Broadcasting. Tiari was on. You were on my first episode. Right, and the last episode was with my dad. Yeah. It was, yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
It was Speakeasy with Denene, and each episode was based on a word, like a password into my life and the things that I thought about in terms of Blackness. And the episode that she's talking about was called Sunshine. And my dad is the sunshine of my life. And so I did, and I caught him one Thanksgiving, and he and I talked about how proud we are of each other. You leave it at that necklace with me.
Okay. So I was so moved by what you were saying about your journey. And then when you rolled up. It's like, whoa, because, you know, I've been a Denene stan for many years. But I am also a child. And what I don't think I ever said to you, and I just felt moved to say it now, is that you approached this work with such love, because that's not always the stories, and that is not always the feeling. And you found you things were tough. And you didn't shy away from that, you didn't flinch. But you always found the glory, and you always found the beauty in these tough stories. And as somebody who I am so thankful. I think that was one of the reasons, like I had to sit down for a minute after I read it, because it made me too think about how I look at these things and what my perspective is for being an adoptee daughter. So thank you. That is, I don't think I've ever said that. We talked a lot about
Yes,
that, but
yes.
I've never said that, and I am just deeply grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question though. Really selfish at this point, but I want to say, was there, just a quick question, yes, quickly, but was there a book that was easier to write than the others? Because you went through definitely 3 different
Yeah,
sets, worlds, not worlds, but you know what I'm saying.
yeah.
Was there one that was easier?
I felt like, first of all, y'all need to understand who this sister is. This is Karen Renee Good-Merrill. And she is one of my favorite writers next to Ida Harris, who was one of the sisters who asked the story, the question about craft. These 2 right here, should you ever just Google them, Ida Harris and Karen Good-Merrill. They are incredible writers. I used to take Karen's pieces and I tell her this all the time, and I say this all the time when she's in the room, so it won't be a surprise to her. But I used to take her pieces out of magazines, rip them out and hang them up on the wall, like, you know, like a Kobe poster. Because she was like the one who always hit the shot every time. So I'm grateful to you for, and you, Ida, and you, Marion, and you, Angela, and you, Age, and you, Celie, for walking me through this and for being my tribe of sisters who put your hands on my back and said, you can do this, go ahead, do it, just do it. You got this. Karen would send me podcasts, she would send me stories about writing, about writers. Ida would tell me a few expletives and say, you got this, you can do this. Each one of you helped me push me forward, so I appreciate that. Karen, I don't forgot which one was. Oh, which book was harder or easier? Grace was the easiest one to write. Because for some reason, the voice of Grace and Mama and Bassy would come to me literally in my dreams. I would literally be sitting at the computer and pull myself away after 2 or 3 hours of writing and not know where that came from. And I really do believe that my mothers were there pouring into me as I was writing that story. And so, and the voice, that Southern kind of way of saying things just feels natural. And we always have these conversations about, like, girl, you from the North Place. And I'm like, you was raised by Southerners. And it feels natural. The hardest one to write really was Ray, because it was so personal. It was so personal, and I felt like Ray hadn't lived enough to, you know, what are you complaining about? What's the problem? Like, and can her voice set in the 90s and the 2000s be as strong and powerful and thoughtful and graceful as the women in the first two? You remember that I was like, please read this, because I don't feel like Ray is giving what Lolo and Grace are giving. And y'all had to talk me through that. I appreciate you for that.
So you had the two of them on your walls. I have the two of you on my shelf because you're both the greatest. My question is along the same line regarding craft. In terms of your previous works and this work, how did your process come together? Like, was it easier or harder writing for yourself than it is in sharing some of the other thoughts for other people? Or did you find it that imposter showed up a little bit more than you preferred when you had to write in your own voice? That's different from your blogs and some of the other things that you shared with us.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Writing for other people is easy because it's reporting. To me, it feels like reporting. Writing Steve Harvey's book or Taraji's book felt like reporting. Whereas I'm not reporting this. This is, you know, wholly of my imagination. I have to build these worlds and build these characters and find ways to tell these stories in interesting ways. So that was really, really hard, but it was more satisfying, right? Because nobody can come along and tell me, I don't feel like saying this today. Those 20 pages that you wrote, I'm gonna need to take those out. I don't want to, and that has happened so many times. So many times. So, you know, and writing for other people was a solitary kind of thing. Just me and the person that I'm writing the book with. And so it's almost like a silo, whereas for my own work, I got to, you know, discuss these things with writers that I respect and that were able to sort of get the early reads and give me either a push or a, yes, this is it, keep going, right? So that was helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And this will be our amazing last question.
I'm mommy. So, I know this book is clearly like based off your life and your experiences, but what would you want someone like in general to take away from this book? Like, what's one thing, especially as a Black woman who, for instance, is a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, what would you want them to take away from this story?
Ooh, okay. I really hope that, what I wanted, really, Mari, was for you and Lila to read the book and be able to see the experiences of Black women through time. And to see how we lean on one another. How even when people have their feet on our necks, that we can get up from that, that there's a way around it, that Black women find a way over it, under it, around it, through it. Always in search of freedom to be who they care to be, right? And as many times as people try to paint us into squares, into boxes, that we don't have to stay there. No matter what's going on, we don't have to stay there. A big sort of theme that runs through the book is about water and the use of water to either drown or to find freedom. And ultimately, water becomes not a place where you drown, but a place where you go to get free. I won't say what the end is because I want you guys to read it, but the way that it ends, the way that Gray's story ends really is spiritual. It's very much connected and rooted in understanding there's something bigger than us that allows us to be able to walk on water. And so that's what I want each of us, and particularly you and Lila, to walk away with, that no matter what is going on in your life, no matter how many ways people try to hold you down, that you always have the free will to be who you want to be and to figure out how to get around it and walk on that water.
Thank you very much.
I do want to mention that Anna Mathis has a new book coming out. She's actually going to be in Atlanta in conversation with Jericho Brown, who's Terry's colleague. Thank you. That's good. October 5th at the Decatur Public Library. So if you have never read Anna Mathis' book, 12 Times with Patty, she'll be in town with her new book, and she'll be there. So check that out. It's a free event. We are going to invite Denene to come into the lobby first and get set up, and then we're going to invite y'all to come get your book signed and hang out and ask more questions and talk to one another. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Ruben from the library, and thanks to everybody watching.